All right. I want to go back to a story that came up in the spring. It was about your lobbying work for the, at the time, African nation of Namibia and mining interests in Africa. Now, here's what caught my eye that wasn't really touched on. Namibia was a puppet regime of the Apartheid regime of South Africa for many years. And so when you talk about mining in Namibia, you're inevitably talking about South Africa in that area. So did any of your work in the 1980s or 1990s, either for an employer or on your own, either indirectly or directly support that apartheid regime of South Africa?
Not. Namibia was a victim of South Africa's oppression in that fashion. South Africa governed Namibia after both the League of Nations and the United Nations did not recognize the United Nations authority over it. So when I was there, it was so Namibia could become independent from South Africa. That was a joyous time for everyone. Namibia could be on its own, and my role was to help them develop economically so they could stand on their own. The puppet of South Africa, they were a victim of what South Africa had done. They wanted their independence, and that's why I was excited to be there. I'd lived in South Africa. I'd lived in Zimbabwe before that. Believe me, people wanted to move away from apartheid. And certainly, so people who say Namibia is a puppet regime, it was the victim of what South Africa.
And so there were no South African interests at all involved in anything you did in that area. And I ask because the news reports of the time show there were South African interests involved in trying to get Namibia to go a certain way.
The last thing we heard as well is that this is somehow working for Iran because during the Shah's time, in the 70s,
I'm not so much interested in the Iran piece. It is the South Africa piece that is intriguing because of the politics of that time.
Let me tell you, I lived in South Africa under apartheid. I was there for nearly 2 years. It was an awful system. Everybody wanted to move away from that, and me certainly. For anybody to suggest that I in any way countenanced what the South Africans were doing or the policy of apartheid is offensive. Anyway, I just, when I hear that line come up, it just baffles me completely that anybody would look at any of my record and try to suggest that somehow I was in line with what the South Africans wanted when it was my role to make sure that Namibia could stand on its own, independent of South Africa.
Okay, I always wanted to ask that question.
Thank you for asking.
It's been something I've wondered about ever since I saw that story.